The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of dust and jagged stone under a sky so pale it seemed drained of color. Each step weighed heavier on the man, his rations nearly gone, water almost spent, yet still he pressed forward. Survival was no stranger to him, but the world offered no mercy, only endless heat and silence broken by the occasional rumble of shifting cliffs. It was in that silence that he first heard it, a faint cry carried on the dry wind, sharp and desperate, a sound too out of place to ignore. Instinct and curiosity pushed him toward it, though reason warned him to stay the course. He followed the echo into a narrow canyon, jagged walls rising high, shadows stretching like claws across the ground. The cry grew clearer until at last he saw her, a figure pinned beneath the weight of a fallen rockslide. Her body was alien, humanoid in shape yet unmistakably otherworldly. Long limbs, patterned skin faintly glimmering like starlight, and eyes wide with both pain and defiance. She thrashed weakly, trapped, her breath shallow. She noticed him then, and though fear flickered across her face, she bared her teeth, as if ready to fight even as death pressed down. He could have left her. He could have turned and walked away, conserving his dwindling strength for himself. Instead, he stepped forward. His hands worked with desperate precision, prying at stones, using a scavenged pole as a lever, forcing rock to shift little by little. The girl hissed and flinched, as though expecting cruelty, but he said nothing, only grunted with effort. Muscles strained, sweat mixed with the dust, and finally, with one last shove, the stone lifted just enough for her to pull free. She collapsed on the ground, gasping, her legs trembling as if unsure freedom was real. The human knelt, his canteen in hand. It was nearly empty, every drop precious, yet he tilted it to her lips. She hesitated, suspicious, but thirst overcame pride. She drank greedily, her strange eyes never leaving his face. He tore cloth from his own sleeve, binding the cuts along her arms, improvising medicine from what little he carried. She studied the motions, puzzled by the care, as though unable to reconcile the stranger's actions with the harshness of her world. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Her breathing steadied, her gaze softened, but then she pushed herself to her feet, limping but determined. Without a word, she stumbled away into the fading light, glancing back only once before vanishing into the canyons. He watched her go, unsure if she would live or perish in the wastes, but he made no move to follow. He was a wanderer, and she belonged to a people he did not know. As night settled and cold stars pierced the dark, he returned to his solitary path. He had given more than he could afford, strength, time, water, and yet, strangely, he felt lighter. The desert remained as hostile as ever, but something in the silence had shifted. What he did not know, could not know, was that his single act of compassion had already set ripples in motion. Somewhere in the distance, steps were being taken, and the winds of the desert carried whispers of a debt that could never be ignored. The days passed in weary silence, the human's path stretching endlessly through the wasteland. His camp was simple, marked only by a small fire and a shelter fashioned from scavenged fabric. He had grown used to solitude, the emptiness of the desert answering him with nothing but the whistle of wind. Yet one morning the air felt heavier, as though unseen eyes pressed down upon him. It was not his imagination. Shapes emerged from the horizon, moving with purpose, fanning out in a half-circle. They were tall, broad-shouldered, armored in layers of bone and metal, each step deliberate, each face set with grim determination. They were all women, a dozen or more, carrying weapons that caught the light in sharp flashes. Their presence was a wall of authority, but at the center of them stood the girl he had rescued. No longer frail or trembling, she was steady, head high, wounds healed, her eyes fixed on him with something between pride and gratitude. She gestured toward him with a hand marked in symbols of her people, and the warriors closed in. He rose to his feet slowly, wary but unflinching. The leader stepped forward, a towering figure scarred across the cheek, wearing a mantle of decorated scales that spoke of countless victories. Her gaze measured him like a blade at his throat. Words came, rough and broken, but the meaning was clear enough. Saving the girl had bound him. In their law, in their culture, an act of rescue was not dismissed as chance or kindness. It was an oath, a tether. He had saved the daughter of their matriarch, and that meant he was now tied to the fate of the tribe itself. Confusion rippled through him, but their certainty was immovable. A carved token was pressed into his hand, smooth and heavy, etched with lines that spiraled like veins of fire. He understood instinctively that it was more than a trinket. It was a symbol, a declaration, protector. To refuse it was unthinkable in their eyes, an insult that would mark him an enemy. He hesitated, turning it over in his palm, weighing the cost of a single moment of compassion. Not all faces looked upon him kindly. Among the warriors, some muttered, their eyes sharp with doubt. A man from beyond the wastes, frail and foreign, could not stand among them. One in particular stepped forward, her frame lean and corded with muscle, eyes burning with challenge. She raised her weapon, not to kill, but to demand proof. The tribe's honor could not rest on someone untested. The challenge was inevitable. The duel was not fair by any measure. She lunged with strength and speed, her strikes heavy enough to break bone. But he did not meet strength with strength. He shifted, evaded, forced her to overextend. He used the ground itself, tripping her with loose stones, ducking low and letting her momentum work against her. Where she sought to overpower, he sought to outlast, every move measured, every breath conserved. At last, she lay sprawled in the dust, weapon torn from her grip, while he stood above her, not triumphant, but steady, refusing to deliver a final blow. The camp erupted in murmurs. Some warriors looked on with new respect, others with anger, but none could deny what they had seen. The leader stepped forward again, her gaze unbroken. His place among them, she declared, would be tested not once but many times. Protector was no title to carry lightly. The tribe would weigh his worth in the days ahead, and if he faltered, their law would devour him. As the sun dipped low, the tribe settled, yet the tension lingered in the air like smoke. He sat by his fire, the token heavy in his hand, listening to the low hum of their voices in the distance. He had never sought this, never wished for more than survival. Yet now, bound by their law, his fate was no longer his own. The girl he had saved watched him from across the camp, her eyes catching the firelight. For the first time, he saw not fear or mistrust there, but certainty, as though she already knew he would stand the tests to come, whether he wanted to or not. The days that followed blurred into trials, each one pressing him harder against the weight of expectations he had never asked for. The tribe moved through lands that teemed with danger, every step shadowed by the presence of predators that stalked the night and watched from the cliffs by day. Their warriors had faced these creatures before, blades flashing, muscles straining in contests of strength. Yet when the ground trembled and one of the beasts finally struck, it was not their ferocity that turned the tide, it was his preparation. He had spent the day weaving traps into the sand, digging pits lined with sharpened stakes, fashioning noisemakers from metal scraps tied with bone. When the predator lunged, jaws wide enough to snap a warrior in two, the earth betrayed it. It crashed into the trap, its roar echoing across the canyon as panic swept the tribe. He guided their defense with quick gestures, setting fire to brush piles at the right moment, choking the air with smoke. The creature thrashed, blinded and confused, and the warriors pressed the attack until the sand fell silent. For the first time, they looked at him not as a stranger carrying a burden, but as someone who had saved lives by thinking differently. Even those who had doubted stood quieter, though not all were convinced. One rival in particular still burned with contempt, her pride refusing to bow. She challenged him once more, not to blades or fists, but to the trial of the protector, a journey through the wastes with nothing but what the hand could carry. It was a test of endurance, a measure of who deserved to shield the tribe. They set out together, watched by the others from afar. She carried herself like a warrior carved from stone, strength in every step, but strength waned when thirst gnawed and the sun flayed the skin raw. He rationed what little he had, drank sparingly, read the stars at night to guide his path. Where she pushed forward blindly, he searched the land for hidden signs, moisture trapped in canyon cracks, roots that yielded drops of water, insects that led to places of shade. He shared nothing at first, watching as her bravado bled away into exhaustion, until finally she faltered. Only then did he lead her to water, placing survival above pride. By the time they staggered back, the contrast was clear. She had endured by leaning on strength, and it nearly destroyed her. He had endured by knowing, by planning, by adapting, and it had carried them both. Her eyes, once sharp with scorn, now met his with the hard truth of acceptance. She gave no words of praise, but none were needed. Her silence was admission enough. Through it all, the girl he had rescued lingered near, no longer a shadow but a steady presence. She mimicked his gestures, learned his words piece by piece, and showed him fragments of her own. They traded meanings, laughter slipping through in rare moments when neither side understood, but both tried anyway. She revealed that no outsider had ever been drawn into their oath before. Protectors had always been chosen from within, warriors tested by combat alone. He realized then that what they demanded was more than tradition, it was survival. Their people had always measured worth by the strength of the arm, yet it was cunning they lacked. The desert made no allowances for the unprepared. It rewarded the careful, the patient, the ones who adapted when the rules shifted beneath their feet. He had lived this truth long before they had ever crossed his path, and now the tribe began to see it. Their acceptance came slowly, begrudgingly, but it grew all the same. Still, the true test waited on the horizon, carried by dust and rumor. Scouts arrived with grave faces, speaking of a hostile clan that marched with numbers greater than their own. War was coming, and the burden of protector would no longer be a trial in the wastes, but a reckoning in blood. The enemy came with the dawn, a tide of warriors marching beneath banners of bone and steel. Their numbers dwarfed the tribes, their chants rolling across the desert like thunder. The women readied themselves, weapons drawn, faces grim, but even they knew the odds. To stand in open battle was to die. He stepped forward, refusing silence, his voice steady though his heart pounded. Strength alone would not win this fight, not against a force so large. The desert itself had to become their weapon. All through the night he had walked the canyons, studying the land, marking places where rock crumbled loose, where shadows fell thick, where echoes twisted sound. Now his plan unfolded. He divided the warriors into swift bands, each small enough to vanish, each placed where the terrain could favor them. Fires were lit in distant gullies, smoke rising in thick veils to mislead the enemy. Shards of reflective metal were hidden at choke points, ready to blind with sudden bursts of light. Pits were dug where the sand lay soft, covered with branches, waiting for careless feet. The matriarch gave her silent approval, though the unease in her eyes betrayed the risk. The warriors moved to their places, and as the enemy drew close, the desert seemed empty. Confusion rippled through the invading clan when they found no battle line, only silence and smoke. Then the ground betrayed them. A front rank collapsed into hidden pits, screams splitting the air. Arrows and spears rained from unseen perches, and quick strikes cut into their flanks before vanishing back into shadow. Their formation broke as shouts of command faltered, turned into cries of fear. He stood at the center, directing with sharp gestures, guiding the flow of the ambush. Where the enemy pressed hardest, he shifted their focus, leading them into narrow gullies where their numbers meant nothing. Blinding light flashed at the crucial moment, throwing them into chaos. When the great war beasts they had brought surged forward, smoke and fire confused them, sending them crashing into their own lines. The tribe fought with ferocity, but more than that, they fought with purpose. Every strike was guided by his plan, every move designed not for glory, but for survival. At the height of the chaos, the rescued girl stood beside him, weapon in hand, her face fierce and unyielding. She fought not as one saved, but as one determined to protect. Together they drove back an enemy champion, her blade finding openings as he forced the warrior off balance with stones thrown at precise moments. The clash ended with the enemy sprawling, their arrogance shattered before the combined force of guile and courage. Panic spread through the rival clan as trap after trap claimed more of their number. The desert swallowed their strength, turned their confidence into ruin. At last, with their lines broken and their beasts fleeing wild, the enemy scattered, retreating in defeat. The air rang with the cries of victory, the women lifting their weapons high, voices fierce with triumph. When silence returned, the tribe gathered around him. The matriarch approached, her scarred face solemn. She declared him protector not by accident of tradition, but by proof of action. He had taken what was fragile in their way of life and shown them another path, one that valued cunning as much as courage. The token they had pressed upon him before was returned, not as a burden this time, but as a mark of belonging. The rival who once despised him stood silent, then gave a nod sharp as a blade, acknowledgment carved from humility. The rescued girl stepped forward last, placing her hand over his, her eyes filled with certainty. In saving her, he had changed the fate of all her people. He looked out across the desert, the vast expanse still as merciless as ever, but for the first time, he was not alone within it. He understood now that survival was not only endurance of the body, but also the will to protect others even when it cost more than one could afford. His kind had always thrived not by strength of muscle, but by refusing to break, by adapting, by finding a way where none was given. Among a people who had measured worth by scars and duels, he had proven another truth, that compassion was not weakness, but the sharpest weapon of all. The firelight that night burned warm against the endless dark. The tribe sang their victory, voices rising into the stars, and in their circle he no longer felt like an outsider. Protector was not a title he had chosen, yet it was one he bore now with quiet resolve. On a world that demanded power, it was his humanity that had earned their trust, his refusal to abandon life that was not his own. And though the desert would always test him, he would meet it not as one man wandering alone, but as a protector walking among warriors who now called him their own.